Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you could join us for this presentation of the Friends of the St. Paul Library's Moving Words author panel that they do each fall. I'm going to introduce our moderator who will get things started off. This is Murray from the Friends of the St. Paul Library. And so go ahead and do your thing.
Thank you everyone who welcomed me to New Ulm already. Good afternoon. We are so pleased to be partnering with the Traverse des Sioux Library System and to have you joining us for Moving Words, Writers Across Minnesota event. This series is made possible in part by the state of Minnesota through a grant to the Minnesota Department of Education, and additional support is provided by the Harlan Boss Foundation for the Arts and Education Minnesota. I'm with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, which is a Library of Congress designated Minnesota Center for the Book. All the state centers are tasked with promotion of reading, libraries, literacy, and the literary study of books. The Friends has coordinated the year-long Minnesota Book Awards program for 16 years, and the program is more than just the spring ceremony. It is also getting readers and writers together in each of Minnesota's 12 different library systems. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. We're thrilled to have Antonia Angress, Daniel Bernstrom, and Will McGrath with us today. We'll let the writers speak a bit about their work first and take questions in the second half of the program. I'm going to introduce the authors just a bit, and then we'll allow them to share some of their work. Antonia Angress is the author of the novel Sirens and Muses, which was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Awards and was named a Best Book of 2022 by Glamour magazine. She is a graduate of Brown University and received her MFA from the University of Minnesota, where she was a Winifred Fiction Fellow and a College of Liberal Arts Fellow. Born in Los Angeles and raised in Costa Rica, she currently lives in Minneapolis with her family. Daniel Bernstrom is an accidental picture book writer. He repeated first grade because he could not read. Today, Daniel writes picture books that have been nominated for several state reading awards in Illinois, Iowa, and Arizona. And he teaches as a full-time English instructor of children's literature, college writing, and developmental English at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Will McGrath has worked as a reporter, homeless shelter caseworker, UPS truck driver, public radio producer, Burger King chicken sandwich mayo applicator, ghostwriter, and ghost editor in slightly different order. He has written 2 books of essays, Everything Lost is Found Again, and Farewell Transmission. His writing has been featured in numerous magazines and journals. I'm going to allow Antonia to start.
Hey everyone, is this on?
I will double check.
Can everyone hear me? I see some heads shaking.
I will go check in with our technical support.
All right, I'll speak loud in the meantime. I'm Antonia. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for coming. This is my first novel. It took me about 6 to 7 years to write, and by the time I finished, I was very tired of it, as you can imagine. It's an adult literary novel that follows 4 striving, struggling visual artists, first at an elite art college and later in New York City against the backdrop of the Occupy movement. Is that...
Battery's almost dead. Hang on.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, good. So it's a campus novel and a coming-of-age story about love and creativity and ambition, and figuring out who you are and what is important to you in life. And I think I will start just by reading a little bit from the first chapter. That's okay, and then I will hand it off to my fellow panelists. Chapter 1. Louisa's first assignment at Wren College of Art was paint home. She'd left home 12 days ago, and now, as she looked out the classroom window, it startled her still to see hills and sullen, huddled townhouses, the New England sky close and cold, nothing like at home where the sky overwhelmed the land, a drama of clouds and rain and strange shafts of tawny light. She'd never been on her own before. Her year at South Louisiana Community College didn't count. She had slept in her old bedroom, borrowed her mother's car to get to class, worked the same shifts at Chez Jacqueline, eaten Sunday dinner at Grandma and Peppere's. Louisa was homesick. It was normal, she told herself. Even at 19, almost 20, it was normal. And so, alone in her studio, she had cried a little as she painted Lake Martin at dusk, bald cypresses echoed by their dark reflections in the water. It was a placid scene, but ominous, tinged with danger, curdled at the edges like a faded bruise. In the background, low, swollen clouds gleamed with uncanny clarity, and a flutter of pintails took off over the marsh. In the foreground, an ibis waded in the shallows, its bow-shaped beak slicing through the water. Its plumage was a soft, unglossed white, except for its black wingtips. Its pearly blue eye met the viewers. She'd chosen an ibis because Grandma had once told her that it symbolized resilience. It was the last animal to take shelter before a hurricane, and the first to reappear after the storm. No, not resilience, Mom had said, overhearing. Regeneration and wisdom. Danger, Louisa thought. Optimism. Dinner, Pepper added. Hunting ibises was illegal, but he'd grown up shooting them for the table and occasionally still brought one home. The meat was orange and fishy. Now, 1,000 miles away from him, Louisa stood alone in an empty classroom. She'd arrived early to secure a spot on the southern wall, and she was pleased with how her painting looked there, bathed in that diffuse northern light, what Mom called painterly light. One window was cracked to let in a breeze, but the room still smelled sharply of oils and turpentine. Afternoon sun gilded the floorboards. As Louisa's classmates arrived and hung their work, she turned to the wall and ran her fingers over the thumbtack holes. The other sophomores all knew one another already, had spent foundation year together, and in their presence, Louisa felt furiously shy. Maureen walked in, a manila folder under her arm. All professors went by their first names at Rin, which did nothing to make Maureen less formidable. Though her wardrobe consisted entirely of overlarge t-shirts and paint-stained cargo pants, the pockets full of jangly objects, she carried herself with the pugnacious confidence Louisa occasionally saw in certain older women who had stopped caring what the world thought of them. "Everyone ready?" said Maureen. She opened the folder. "We'll go alphabetically this time. Louisa Arsenex, you're up." "Arsenault," Louisa corrected her softly. "It's French." She shifted so she was standing next to her painting with her back to the wall. She hugged her sketchbook to her chest as her classmates, all 15 of them, gathered in a semicircle. Only Maureen brought a chair, its legs squeaking against the floor. She set it in front of Louisa's painting and sat down, crossing her arms. All right, and I will stop there and pass it on.
You can go. Is there, we doing any order? All right. Hi, I'm Will McGrath, and I am a nonfiction writer. Is this loud enough?
Yeah.
Frequently people tell me I'm too loud, so I don't want to overwhelm anyone. So I do nonfiction writing. I've done stuff anywhere from hard journalism to what people call creative nonfiction or literary journalism, memoir, essay. I work anywhere kind of in that nonfiction spectrum. And the stuff that interests me most as a writer, I'm always, interested in people with, I'm mostly interested in people, I think is the bottom line. And I'm gonna read something from my new book here. These are all essays kind of about interesting people from the fringes of society. The book's called Farewell Transmission, Notes from Hidden Spaces. And a lot of the people in the book are living hidden lives in different kind of ways. So I spent a couple years working in the world of homelessness. So there's some stories in the book from people I know from that world. There's a story in here about a guy who was wrongfully imprisoned for 30 years and eventually exonerated. So his life was kind of hidden away in a different way. There's a story in here about, in the modern day in Minneapolis, an urban goat herd, a guy who spends his day herding goats around doing kind of park restoration. So I'm always interested in people kind of doing interesting, weird things on the margins of society and doing what I can to kind of share these stories. The essays in here there's a few of them that are slightly closer to hard journalism, but most of them live in that, I don't know, literary journalism world, which sounds like it's journalism, but things are made up in it, which is not the case. But they're all true stories, but they use kind of novelistic techniques to kind of really get into the world of these people's lives. So yeah, I'm going to read a short little essay from the book here, and while most of the stories in here are about interesting people I've met, there's a handful of stories that are about my kids in one way or another, and 2 of my kids are currently upstairs running around somewhere in the rest of the library. So on the way, we were driving out here from Minneapolis, and I was like, what should I read tonight? And they're like, read one of the stories about us. I was like, all right, that seems fair. Although they're currently having more fun, I'm sure, in their minds, wandering the library by themselves. So this is, I don't know, a weird short little essay that involves my children. And this is called Hallucination Donut Shop. Let me see if I can grab this stand here. Let's see if this will work. I don't know how to use these things too well. All right. Hallucination Donut Shop. We found ourselves up in timber, Sam 4, Eve 2, the 3 of us hung between banks of Maine pine, out on a suspension footbridge humming like picture wire. The Androscoggin churned beneath us, engorged with melt, and from the bridge we watched a lost blue oil drum nod along toward big rocks downriver, where the water tore itself to shreds, became confetti, a dirty white celebration thrown for these early days of spring. We were waiting to see what would happen when that barrel crested and hit the rocks below. At least that's what I was waiting for, and I think the children as well, although their minds are veiled at times. Some part of me hoped for an explosion. It was an oil barrel, was it not? And oil barrels, this I learned from the action films of the late 1980s, do on occasion explode. I relayed my hope to the children, and they agreed this would be thrilling. We braced ourselves, held breath. Over went the barrel. Nothing. Sam sprinted off along the bridge, antelope, boy child, all the toddler in him burned off very recently, leaving a dusting of new freckles across his cheekbones and the bridge of his nose. I held Eve in my arms, and we jumped and jumped against the wooden planking, sending tremors down the line, coded vibrations aimed at Sam, asking him to please come back, please return, so I can feel confident that you will not slip into the charging water and become another lost barrel. At my thunderous jumping, Eve squealed and clung to my neck. Sam returned, older than before, and we left in search of solid ground. We headed into a mill town whose main street you've seen in the background of underperforming rom-coms or featured on the pages of nostalgic collectible calendars. And there we found a storefront donut shop where we could bivouac for the afternoon. The woman at the register had black hair and attended to us with a generosity of spirit that felt like a holdover from another vocation. Perhaps she had been a happy nun in another life, or a beloved preschool teacher. She was in her mid-40s, first grays starting to fisher her dark hair. Her hair, this beyond all else I need to convey. Bangs piled into clouds. Her hair was a buoyant holdover from the early 90s, hair that predated the tech bubble, hair that predated Enron, hair that had never looted anyone's pension. It was the kind of optimistic hair you ride out a recession underneath. I didn't want to stare in dazed admiration for too long, so I paid for my donuts and coffee and gave Sam a crumpled dollar to cram into the tip jar, an undertaking he performed with priestly solemnity. This donut shop in Maine was glorious, a vision in burnt sienna, laminate countertops and swiveling vinyl stools. If they were not playing 60s doo-wop, then I have overlaid it so in my memory. In the storefront window, the owner had set up a toy kitchen, 2 plastic ovens, tiny wooden whisks, child-size aprons stitched with the store's name, and racks of wooden donut simulacra with interchangeable frosting tops. Sam and Eve bustled, serious in bright red aprons, bringing me plate after plate of wooden donuts. Jelly-filled with chocolate frosting? Simply divine. But might you have a chocolate donut with vanilla sprinkles? Perhaps a maple donut with raspberry swirl frosting? Right away, sir. Of course, sir. They returned to their kitchen and swapped frosting tops, stacked donuts into careful pyramids. Eve watched Sam mimicking his subtle motions. The game lasted for nearly 15 minutes, a blissful eternity, and I ate well in that donut shop. 2 fresh cake donuts, 1 chocolate, 1 apple, dense and moist, no airy yeast donuts in this establishment. I don't believe they trafficked in that particular kind of monstrosity. The thought filled me with pride that the donut makers and I should be so morally aligned, and I was filled equally with pride and with donuts. A woman entered the store. She was in her later 60s, silver hair chopped at the collar, modestly dressed in a blue-gray pantsuit. This woman had been watching us through the storefront window for a while now, I realized, frozen in the street as she observed the rites and rituals of the children's donut factory. She approached with a hesitant smile. How old is the girl? Is she 2? Just under, I said. The woman and I watched Eve for a moment, grunting to herself as she baked, dressed in a tiny denim jacket that gave her the appearance of a tiny Joan Jett. I squinted my eyes and tried to picture her with punk eyeliner and a Gibson melody maker slung over her shoulder, hair back in a ponytail, but strands coming loose and messy in her face, one tendril stuck finely along a sweat-beaded temple as she stomped in time to the kick drum. This reverie filled me with such electric joy that I had the momentary urge to grab my daughter and squeeze until she became a fine paste. The circuits in my brain had flooded. The lines for love and violence run parallel, and the surge of emotion had crossed the two in uncanny fashion. Lovely, the woman half whispered. I'm 4, Sam interposed, putting down a tray of donuts. Eve heard this and turned, saw us observing. She stretched out her arm in rigid salute, fingers splayed. 2, she yelled, attempting to bend fingers, trying to count her age, and not yet succeeding. Well, the woman said, and looked at me, her eyes rimming with tears. She was still trying to find the shape of whatever she had come in to tell me. She left to place an order, then returned a moment later, fidgeting and clutching at the white wax paper bag. The woman was unsure of this whole endeavor now. The smile had left her face. The problem, she said, the problem is when they get older. She tried to smile, but all the warmth had blown off, dissipated on the way to the register. The woman looked haunted, hunted, eyes flitting toward the door like she might run for it, flee whatever silent calamity had visited her hearth. I guessed her to be a bit older than my own mother, so I guessed her children to be a bit older than me. I glanced toward the register, but the happy nun was out of sight. We were alone with the woman in the blue-gray pantsuit. Sam and Eve had stopped playing. were watching us now. I became aware that it was very quiet in the donut shop, the needle having skidded from the vinyl. The woman opened her mouth, girding herself, but didn't speak. Then she left the store without looking at us. Eve raised a hand to her as she passed the window, but the woman was somewhere else entirely. We watched her go. Suddenly I wondered what would happen if we followed. A surreal vision slipped into my head. The three of us trailing behind this woman from innocuous remove, ducking behind hedgerows if she grew suspicious and began to turn, stacking the children onto my shoulders like a human totem pole as we slid into a beech tree's silhouette. I would make a game of it for them, conceal my desperation, winking theatrically and pantomiming broad gestures of secrecy, index finger pressed to lips. We would follow, we had to, but the woman in the blue-gray pantsuit must never know. We would trace her path through the neighborhoods as she worried at the white wax bag, our little caravan progressing toward the edge of town. Soon we'd arrive at a quaint ranch house nestled into pine stand. Was there a picket fence? Did she have lawn ornamentation? I couldn't see it yet. But once she was inside, the children and I would creep to the window and peer through the blinds to see what had befallen her. Would she sit on the sofa, face in hands? There must be clues, signposts pointing toward and away. If we looked carefully enough, prepared thoroughly, if we were diligent in our choices, we could learn the ways to neutralize whatever banal mechanisms had cleaved her home. Through the shop's plate glass window, I watched the woman turn a corner and disappear. The children continued to play for a while at donut making, and I marveled at how much older they'd grown since we first entered this place. The air in the shop had thickened into something autumnal, cold drafts sliding through invisible seams in the building's foundations. This was just an encounter we had in a small mill town along the Androscoggin River, a few miles inland, before the coast of Maine ruptures into thousands of Atlantic shards, unmapped islands carried into frigid water.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Daniel Bernstrom, and I'm a picture book writer. So, a little different. I try to do this, not very successfully. And that's why I'm an accidental picture book writer, because I wanted to write such beautiful prose, and it wasn't working. And I was in graduate school, and I got assigned to an advisor, and her name was Jacqueline Briggs Martin, a picture book writer. And I started working on my prose, and she's like, how about you try picture books? And I said, okay. Like, they're interesting. Who likes picture books? That's why I'm an accidental picture book writer, because this is not the place that I ever thought I would ever be. And about 10 years, it's been about 10 years now since my first book, One Day in a Eucalyptus Tree, was published 2001, winning the Minnesota Book Award for Big Pop in the Time Machine. And I still keep wondering, what in the world am I doing as a picture book writer? It doesn't make sense. The way I spend my time is I spend my time as an English instructor at Minnesota West Community Technical College, just talking to students about writing and how to fit their ideas into essays and papers. But my favorite class that I get to teach is children's literature. And one of the ones that I really like is just walking students through, like, what is a story? Now, there are two parts of a story that you probably are familiar with. There's the external plot, and then there's the internal plot. There's different names for it. Some people call it the yearning, or some people call it the heart. Some people might misinterpret it as the theme, because there could be many themes, but The fact that we struggle to name that underlying story indicates how hard it is to write something, even in this beautiful example of, hey, I'm going to go eat donuts. That's the sequence of events of, hey, I'm going to take my children here and move through this sequence. We're going to end up at the donut shop. We're going to meet a woman. She's going to leave. That's the plot. But the internal story is what's going on in the father's heart as he's watching, or not the father, the parent's heart. What's going on in the parent's heart as he's watching another parent? And what does she offer him? And what does he learn? Knowing that eventually those children, like the river, are going to be taken out into the wider ocean of which he'll have no control. Wow. What a... Did I get it?
You probably got it better than me.
You know, yes, I'm a professor of children's literature. That's, in order for a writer to hit that and find that piece, whether we know it or not, is the hardest thing we can do. And if all of us knew how to do it, it wouldn't take us 8 years to write a book. Or, for me, like 7 unpublished novels to try to figure out, like, what in the world is that internal story that I'm trying to tell? But sometimes, looking at smaller versions help us with that. And I know it's not my work, and I know you came to like look at my stuff, but hey, I'm gonna try to move through this really quick. Because when you're dealing with picture books, it's not just about the words. It's about the whole thing. So why not take like the great Maurice Sendak and put it together? So here we go. Here's where the wild things are. I'm not going to read it, I promise. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin with white. Right, and then we have monsters. Even the other interesting thing is just even look at the cover. Why the human feet on the monster? But why human feet on a monster? Well, we get that answer on the night Max wore his wolf suit. Notice the size of the picture. Notice all the white. I'm going to flip the page again. Do you notice the size of the picture? Okay, maybe this is like the eye doctor. Better 1. Better 2. What do you notice about the picture? It's getting bigger. Oh! So he wore a wool suit of one kind or another. His mom called him Wild Thing. And he said, I'll eat you up. And she sent him to bed without eating anything. Really? We were just reading Beatrix Potter at supper the other night. And we got to a story about a bunny, and a mean bunny was hurting another bunny. And then I turned the page, and this is a man with a gun. And I thought, oh boy! I forgot this story. Like, Mom sends this kid to bed without eating supper? That's rather cruel. Isn't it? Isn't that rather heavy-handed for a parent to do? He yells at her, she yells back, doesn't say, oh, how are you? Hope you're doing well. No, go to bed without eating anything. I know some of you, like, I went to bed plenty of times without eating anything. And the pictures get larger and larger. And larger. What's happening to Max? What's going on with him and his life? And there's lots of questions. Where's the dad in the story? Maybe he's off at work and she's just stressed. I don't know where the dad is in the story. But do we ask that question of the picture book? Do we write an essay? Or just go through in our minds, like what's going on. Gets larger and larger. This is deliberate on the part of the illustrator. And larger, where the monsters are there, until he's consumed by his anxiety, worry, fear, his internal monsters. I don't know what Sendak is doing. But he's saying something larger about something. The child has lost himself to a land of monsters in his room. Or something like that. And is he going to come out? Is he going to come back? What's interesting is he becomes the king of the wild things. Very interesting. And he rules them. But once he becomes king, and he has all the fun that he wants, notice what happens. Oh, it gets better. We're coming back down, aren't we? Until he's called back by the smell of food, where he finds his supper waiting for him, and notice what happens to the picture. And it was still hot. His anxiety is gone. The monsters are under control. Why would you have nothing on a picture book spread? Unless you're trying to tell me something important. An act of love by the mother calling him home. Now, in Goodnight Little Man, not even comparable to Sendak. But the illustrator here also tries to go through the colors, where we start off in a gentle blue with the child going to bed. But the child's worried and anxious about something. He goes looking for something. The external plot is he's looking for a sheep. But what's the internal story? Notice the change of colors. Now we're into yellow. Now we're into purple. Now we're into a bright blue. And who do we see standing there? It's a father with his hands on his hips. A father who's upset, who needs to get to bed. I have 6 children. This is not autobiographical. They say write what you know. Father helps little man out. Papa helps search high and low, wherever did that sheep go. We'll look tomorrow, Papa said. Just sleep with Bear in your bed. No, said little man. Excuse me, son? No, said little man, we can't be done. Then Papa used his upset voice. Go back to bed and no more noise. Right, that upset voice, right? Usually it was my mother's upset voice with me. But Papa, sheep scared. Then Papa thundered, I don't care. What do you notice about the color? Papa's had it, he's done, he's at his max. But there's one more color. What's more startling or more scary than orange? Then little man stomped, and little man stormed, and little man kicked his feet and roared, and little man screamed with kicking feet, I will not sleep without my sheep! How the emotions of the father or the parent are mirrored often in the child. You saw that in Where the Wild Things Are. We're down to bright blue. Where's Sheep? Oh, said Mama. Oh dear. I fear I have his sheep here. At the beginning of the story, it was just Dad putting him to bed. Father says, I'm sorry. Little man forgives him. And then at the end of the story, he's not missing sheep, but he has what? Mom, sheep, and Dad saying good night. And what about the colors? We've come back down. So with stories or with picture books, and you read it, how many of us go, oh, we read it, oh, is this good or bad? You know, how do I feel about writing a book that has no sentence in it and like 117 words, right? There's not one sentence in this book? How did he do that, right? Oh, it's just, that's interesting. Ask questions. When you read picture books, sit with them. Ask questions. Ask about the colors. Ask why. Look about what's there or not. Don't just read the words. Read the pictures too.
Thank you all so much. Now we would love to take some questions from the audience. So if anyone has one, I will grab the mic and bring it around. Would anyone like to get us started with the first question?
The picture book writer, you don't do the illustrating, right? You just write the text. So is it a surprise to you what they do with your words?
Yeah.
I am fortunate that in my, it is surprised what they do. The editor I work with allows me to see the art, and she allows me to collaborate. I'm very gentle on the collaboration. Some writers can be heavy-handed about what they want. I am very hands-off. Usually, if there's anything, is I might change the text to fit. In A Bear, Bee, and a Honey Tree, the illustrator actually illustrated something better than what I had written. Oh, that's really good. Let me just move. Boom. And the illustrator said, this is the first time in my illustrating career that an author has changed his words to match my art. So yes, it's a surprise, but I try to be open to like the entire work, that I am part of a collaborative team to create a whole experience.
Just with that, does your illustrator know what you want to convey? She doesn't.
Just through the text. She figures it out.
So it always fits what you had in mind.
Sometimes better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Joanne. I'm sorry we came late. I didn't get to hear our first talker. So I don't know, just some general questions. how do you know how long a story should be, whether it's, all three of you can ask that, is there a certain length the story has to be? And if you don't have a children's book, do you have a choice in what the cover of your book's gonna look like? And, I don't know, just all those kinds of things I'm wondering about.
So there are sort of these, and I'm speaking here for, I'm a novelist and I write novels for adults. People who write novels for kids or for young adults have different parameters. But generally speaking, because of things like printing costs, right? Paper and ink costs money. Generally, a book needs, an adult novel needs to be anywhere between 60,000 to 120,000 words. More than that, and you get into sort of doorstop territory, which some people can pull off. You know, if you're George R.R. Martin, you can write a doorstop. Most of us are not George R.R. Martin. This particular book was 110,000 words. So that's pretty hefty, it's pretty long for a novel. And one of the reasons for that is because it's written from the perspective of 4 different characters. So I had 4 different characters whose stories I needed to flesh out. I'm working on my second book right now, and I think it's going to be a lot shorter. I just finished a draft that's 65,000 words, so that's much more of a slim novel. Now I know that I have a friend who writes middle grade fiction. That's fiction for generally for kids in middle school. And I was talking to her recently, and she said she always aims for about 40,000 words. And for her books. So it really varies genre by genre. And then you had a question about whether we get to pick the cover. I had no say in my cover. I like my cover a lot. I was not unhappy with it. But generally, the publisher has a whole art department that decides what the cover looks like, and oftentimes the marketing people weigh in. They say, we think that this type of reader is going to buy this book, therefore the cover needs to look like this. So you can push back if you really hate your cover. Sometimes they will take that into account. I have not had this experience, I'm fortunate, but I do know people who've ended up with covers that they didn't really like.
So for me, the length question, these are a bunch of individual shorter pieces. Some of them are kind of related to each other, but a few of them started out as magazine pieces. So there's, a kind of a general length you're working with. Some of them are very short. There's one thing in here that's just a page long. And I think for all of them, I'm just kind of following some idea. You're following some idea as long or short as it will take you. The longest story in here is about a guy who was wrongfully imprisoned for 30 years. And so for his story, I wanted to let that breathe as much as possible and really, show the fullness of his experience as much as I could. And yeah, some things you just get into it and you're kind of like, I've said, I think I got there. And there's 2 pieces in here that started out as short little pieces in a magazine that in the time that when I first wrote them and then when I was putting this book together, some developments had happened. And it was really nice to go back and revisit those things and add almost like a part 2. So those ones expanded just based on, the vicissitudes of life that happen in any kind of story. But yeah, I'm just kind of following the idea till it hits some natural endpoint. And then as for my cover, so my publisher is a smaller indie publisher, and so they did my first book as well, and I have a good relationship with these people. And I think they have less financially at stake. So for my first book, I really liked the cover. They had a different artist do it. And for the second one, I have a good friend of mine who's an artist and a graphic designer. And I started talking with him and I was telling him about this book and I was like, do you want to do the cover for the book? And so I just brought it to the publisher, and I was like, I have this guy who I would really like to do it, and they were okay with it. But I think that's rare. And then he also did, each one of the essays in here has a short little illustration at the top of the chapter. And so he did all of those as well. So that was fun too, to work with, he would read them and we would bounce ideas off each other of what the little kind of symbol was for each chapter. And some of them are, when you first see them, it's kind of unclear, like, why is there a picture of this random milkshake, in front of the story? And then some of them become clear. So hopefully that adds a little depth to some of them as well.
Picture book length is 32 pages, all the way up to about 40. It's with its cost. So with is it the P&G? Don't ask me what that means.
The P&L?
Is it P&L? P&L.
Profit and loss statement.
Yeah, P&L. Thank you. They say that, but there's other words that they sprinkle in there. And I asked my editor to explain it to me once, and she sent me a document. Like, this is how much we can offer you for an advance. This is how much we expect to sell. This is how much printing's gonna cost. And this is how much the paper. But I really want nice paper, so you're not gonna get as much. So that's how it breaks down. This is how much ink costs. So this book has nicer paper. And this one doesn't. I can feel the difference. Harper was cheap. This is, Harper's very cheap. So it all depends on how much the publisher wants to spend. And then for the covers, no, I don't even want to say, because I am not. Yes, I can appreciate it. I can study it. I think I like studying it more than but don't ask me about art or what's good. Let me look at words and have fun. I just debated with my editor over changing a word to an A and a the, and she's like, I will consider it. Which is why I say, please spend time looking at it, because there have been bitter arguments over the smallest thing.
I'm really sorry, I don't know your name, but the man in the middle.
I'm Will.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, for the essays, did you have in mind that you were going to create this book when you were creating these essays? Or is it a blend of things that you've created and then things that you created for the book itself? And how did you piece those all together? Is there a theme, or is it just kind of all over the place? I don't know.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely toward the second half there, where some of these pieces existed before in a magazine or a literary magazine form, and there were a couple of them that I really liked, and I just thought, I wish these things had another life, and there was about 5 of them or something like that, and I started looking at them together, and then I had some other things that I was working on, and I started to see, I was like, these things belong together in some way, although I couldn't piece it together first of what it was exactly. And so then I started kind of collecting more and more of these shorter things that I thought were all somehow talking to each other, but it took me, and then at that point I knew I wanted them to be a book, and then I was working on new things, and then I kind of got to this place where I was like, oh, these are all interesting people living different kind of hidden lives out in the margins of society, or just some of them are just kind of hidden in plain sight, and that's kind of what I realized, that there was this element in all these stories of some sort of hiddenness that I was intrigued by. And that's kind of when I came to that word. That's when the whole collection really started to come together for me. And then I had some, then I had these things that I was working on. I was like, oh, now I'm working on that specifically to fit in here. So that kind of guided the direction and the shape for some things as well. And then I started listening to music that I thought kind of related, and then it just becomes this like creative mood board soup in your head where you're like, I think these things all belong in some way together, and yeah, you kind of figure it out like that. Or at least that's how it works for me. Do you have any thoughts, Dana?
If there's not someone else with the first question, can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
The woman on the end, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Antonia.
You said it took about 7 years or so for that?
Yeah.
And you got very tired of it, I can. But what made it take that long? I'm sure there were many drafts. Did you have an editor that was kind of pushing you to do certain things? Or how did that work for you, and how did you stay committed to it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Part of the reason it took a long time is because I'd never written a novel before, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was going to say they don't print instruction manuals for how to write novels. They do actually. But even with those, it's one of those things that's just it's really hard. So it took many, many drafts, and I started writing this when I was pretty young. I started this when I was like 22 or 23, and I changed a lot as I wrote it, but I didn't finish it until I turned 30. And so a lot of what I wrote very early on, I was sort of unhappy with as I got older. So that's one answer. I'm also a particularly slow writer, I think. There are some authors who can kind of churn out a book a year, a book every 2 years. I'm not one of those. I've been working on my current project, which is my second novel. I've been working on it for 3 years. It's not close to done. I did not have an editor for this until after I sold the manuscript. So some authors do work sort of independently with editors. There are lots of editors out there who you can hire. They'll take a look at the manuscript and kind of help you with it. In my case, I had people I trusted to read drafts. Eventually, I also went to grad school. I got an MFA, and so I had professors who were reading my work and helping me with it. And then later on, my agent, I did a round of edits with her, but I did not work with a book editor until after the manuscript had been sold.
But then you did work with an editor, and did they expect changes?
They did, not huge changes. Interestingly, my editor said that first novels are usually in very good shape, in part because people spend such a long time on them. And I think that's true. I know, having published a first novel, I now have a lot of friends who are first-time novelists. We all kind of band together because it can be sort of a deeply anxiety-provoking experience to publish your first book. And most of them, took. It is not. I would say that it is not unusual to take close to a decade to write a first book, especially a novel, because you really don't know what you're doing, and a lot of young authors, I think, kind of grow up with their work and sort of have to discard writing that they did when they were not fully mature or ready to do the writing that they eventually produced.
I could probably speak louder,
Yeah.
but I know you're a professor, so you have a full-time job, so you write part-time. What about the other two? Do you have jobs, or do you?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not writing
I have
hours a day.
So most writers have day jobs, in part because it is very, very difficult to make a full-time living at this, unless you're Stephen King. or J.K. Rowling, it is very, very hard to support yourself doing just writing. I am fortunate that I have a spouse who has health insurance. So I freelance. I have a day job, a part-time day job. I teach. I work with students, with high school students primarily, and then I write the rest of the time. And I think that's the case for most of the writers I know. They have side hustles. They teach, or they edit, or they do something completely unrelated to writing.
Yeah, very similar situation for me. My wife has a full-time job, and I kind of cobble various things together, teaching creative writing classes from semester to semester, and also just being in charge of our kids a lot of the time. They're getting bigger now, but I've spent many years just like running the child show, so that's its kind of own kind of income in a certain way.
I knew that my wife doesn't work, and it was me. I went to graduate school. I got my MFA in writing so that I could get a job. I have a visual impairment. It's better now. It's weird to say, but it's better now because of work that Mayo had done. Mayo Clinic has helped repair my eyesight, but I needed a job, so I went to graduate school so I could get an English degree so I could teach, and I loved stories. I loved them. I love them so much. So I just all the little things that you're doing, maybe while you're here, I'm in heaven, just listening to how you're putting things together. But then, when I was going to go on to get my doctorate, my wife and I became pregnant. She was working at the time. I was going to graduate school and picking up other jobs, and to fit in the income. And she just came home crying every day, and I couldn't take it. And I said, I'll find the nearest thing I could get. So I got a job at college as a staff, and then eventually I got to the position of faculty. But it was in graduate school where I thought that if I had all day to write, my life would be amazing, that I did some of my worst writing. And so it was when I started to write at between 4 and 6 in the morning, then I'd get on the bus at 7, go to work in Minneapolis, that I started, this is just these 2 hours in the morning. I can do that every morning. So that's been my practice so that's my writing time, and I just come every morning to my desk. Kids are quiet and asleep, mostly. We just had a new baby, so I'm a little off my schedule. But mostly that's my schedule for writing.
Antonia, for your novel, do you see a lot of yourself or anyone else in your life, a lot in your characters, or was it kind of just like going off on your own thing and just creating these fun characters, or did you base it on your own life and people like that?
So I think I'm fairly unusual in that my first novel is not at all autobiographical. I think it is often the case that people's debuts are very autobiographical. My second novel is going to be a lot more autobiographical than my first. That said, I think most novelists take from life. So there's certainly like little glimmers of people I know and myself in these characters. Oftentimes I will start out, when I create a character, I'll take like a little quirk from someone I know, or not necessarily someone I know, but someone I like noticed, or a story that a friend of a friend told me or something, and kind of build a character off of that. But generally, I don't take sort of people wholesale from my life and put them in my fiction. I think they would get pretty. It's fair game, but I think they would get pretty upset if I did that. And there's also less creative freedom you know, if you take someone that you know already. What I like to do is start, you know, maybe use someone I know as scaffolding and then kind of jump off into fictional territory from there.
Is it difficult for it to like get in the mind of a whole new character, like and not think as yourself? Does that make sense? Like
It's really fun. I mean, it's difficult, but it's fun. It's like, fiction is a way to kind of, you know, take all like the worst thoughts that you've had, all the impulses that you would never like follow through on, and like put them on the page and see how it might turn out. So in a way, it's kind of like playing God. It's like I'm gonna imagine this thing that I would never do or say in real life, and see how it plays out.
Does anyone have any final questions?
Anybody else? The gentleman in the middle. This is your second book.
Yes.
What was your first book like? Was it very similar?
So my first book is all about a tiny country in southern Africa where my wife and I lived for a couple years. So it's a country called Lesotho, which is it's inside South Africa. It's its own little independent kingdom inside South Africa. And so my wife is an anthropologist, and we lived over there for a couple of years and have gone back and forth a bunch of times over the years. So I wrote a book about that country, kind of just like a little cultural portrait and celebration of this place that a lot of people don't know about, and myself included until I went there. But it's an amazing, wonderful country. So my first book is kind of like a celebration of that place.
Could each of you just say, I know you're working on a second novel, if you're working on something specific right now?
Oh, sure. I mean, always just stuff. That's very general. I am working on picture book stuff. I'm gonna just leave it at that.
So you can work on several things at a time. Okay.
I have an editor looking at a middle grade novel. I have an agent out with a YA novel. I have something under option at Disney. I have something stuff. So that's what I mean. I think that's what you have to. I mean, you have to keep writing. Otherwise, for me, I have to keep writing, and it's just fun. It's creative, and so you just keep throwing stuff out there and see what happens, and keep working.
So you didn't feel restricted to picture books at all?
I want to do what they do.
When I grow up.
Now I want to do what you do. Let's swap. I mean, same story in that I'm always, trying to follow, and it's slightly different for me because I do nonfiction, so I will have these, little kernels of something that I hear about, and I think, oh, this is going to be good, and then I follow it, sometimes for months, sometimes for years, and eventually, sometimes I reach a place and I'm like, that wasn't anything. I invested a lot of time thinking about that and following that, and it did not come out to anything. But then sometimes, it hits. Sometimes you follow an idea to a point where you're like, oh, there's something really here. This is an interesting thing. But as you say, you're always putting stuff out into the world. You're always following those little threads, and a lot of times it doesn't pay off, and sometimes it does. And that's just how you got to be I think a creative person in the world is just following all those little leads.
I might be an outlier here in that or at least at this table, that I work on one thing at a time. I get kind of like tunnel vision, and I get really obsessive about it, and it's all I think about. And I think that might just be the particular medium that I work in. I write novels, and writing a novel is kind of like a marathon that takes multiple years. So you do have to be, in my experience, there are some novelists who can work on multiple projects at a time. I'm not one of them. I kind of need to be like a dog with a bone and just go at one thing for years and hope it works out.
Can I just, go ahead.
Oh. What's happening with AI and with authors?
We don't want them to use our work. We don't want them to train on our work. I think that's the consensus. You guys have thoughts?
See, yeah, that seems fair. I don't, maybe I'm an outlier here in that I don't worry about it too much for me, just because I have my own weird little dumb ideas and then I just follow them where they lead me. Like, I don't know. I don't think a computer is gonna come up with this weird little idea that is only interesting to me, probably. But yeah, I don't know. That's all
So I'm in an English department, and I was talking with one of my colleagues, and she said, yeah, I was going over these great poems and thought, wow, they really internalized what I taught them. I'm so proud of them. These are so good. And then she ran them through an AI generator, and they came back. So I don't know. There's something creative, especially creative, about this thing. Can it do what we do? To quote her, we've written about this, we've said that this is dangerous, and they're still going to build the machine. So who knows? But that's the creatives in us. So maybe it'll be generation for more great ideas about AI taking over the world and ruining everything. But no, it's definitely a concern. That's why the writers, screen actors, screenwriters,
America.
and the Writers Guild of America just got an email from my agent about that. So no, we're trying to protect our work because I don't know how this thing can do it, and I want to know how it figures out story, because how did it figure it out and not me?
We'll take one final question right over here.
And it's too personal, you don't have to answer, but I'm just curious, if you want to write a book, what kind of money do you have to have up front, and who gets your money, and if you have an agent, and do you have to be paying them every month by month, and how does that all work? You know, I don't know.
Never pay someone to publish your work.
You never.
You never. The money flows towards the author. So you should never ever pay a publisher to publish your work, because that's not a real publisher.
Okay, good to know that. Yeah, and then you have an agent, or why do you have an agent to promote your work?
Your agent sells your work, and they take. It depends on the agreement, but usually they take 20% of your earnings,
Okay.
and they don't make any money until you make money.
Okay, good to know that.
Anyone else?
So, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for coming and asking questions. And thank you, Daniel, Will, and Antonia. We really appreciate you being here today. So thank you so much.